And while you were walking outside on this beautiful day, I hope you didn't see any houses that had mold or blemishes or all kinds of troubling afflictions that we
Green,
read about.
Like what we, okay.
Yeah,
like green and red, right?
yes, which we read about in our parsha.
Well, that was the Kohanim. They were the precursors of Montgomery County's building inspectors.
Oh, yes.
And they probably got paid off too.
So you're already hinting to maybe what might be one of the explanations of this whole strange
It
phenomenon.
wasn't actually the building. It was what was in the building, the clothing. I read ahead. And it was the clothing and the furnishings.
Okay, so we have a double parsha this week, and we're going to talk about the rocks that are in trouble, and also, in contrast, a rock that saved the day. That would be a different rock. Okay,
Different rock, but it got Moshe in trouble over that rock.
No, not
Not
that
yet.
rock. You'll see.
Okay, let's see.
We might not have time today. This might be a two-part series.
Okay.
And there's a reason why there's a light blue background for the rock that saved the day. So
Yes.
I'm going to leave you all in suspense.
Yeah, Wasser. Yeah.
So the Torah has rocks getting into trouble in Mitzorah, in the second part of the doubleheader. And what are we talking about? Is it something that looks like this? And it's called tzaraat ha-bayit. And I don't want to translate the word tzaraat. A lot of people think leprosy, but it's not. It's not a medical condition. I agree with the commentators who say that it's a spiritual affliction that manifested itself in physical forms, because the Torah never says go to see a doctor. It's all taken care of spiritually. So the Torah starts off not with affliction of walls or stones, but with affliction of a person. So maybe we'll see the sequence of how the did you see the sequence of afflictions?
Yes.
Yeah. So we start the parsha with tzaraat of the flesh, and all the different laws, and if he sees what colors he see on the skin, and then quarantines the person, and then he checks him after 7 days. Then if it continues, he quarantines for. It's very, very complicated, very nuanced. Then, so that takes us from verse 1 to 46. You see, it's a lot of verses. Then we move to tzaraat of the clothing, tzaraat ha-beged. So John was referring to that. What if your clothes have all these blemishes and they have this discoloring? So then there's laws for that. That's verses 47 to 59. Then the summary, Zot Torat HaMetzorah. What happens when the affliction ends? There's a whole ritual, very, very bizarre ritual. You take two birds, you slaughter one, you dip the other live bird in the blood of the slaughtered bird, together with hyssop, together with a piece of wood, and then you release the live bird, and she flies. A very, very bizarre ritual. Maybe one year we'll look at that. And you bring a korban, you bring this, and then you're pronounced tahor, and you can return back to the community. Then you would think this is where it ends. Then the Torah adds in Leviticus 14, verse 33, suddenly, oh, and when you come into the land of Canaan, you might see tzaraat of the house. And let's see the verses that describe that. So we thought we're done with tzaraat, and then suddenly the Torah adds this portion of, wait, you think it can only be with people or with clothing? I got news for you. This can be also on the walls of your houses. So let's see. Does it look like this? Does it look like this? Let's read the verses. A volunteer to read the verse. Do we have a volunteer?
Okay, when you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, and I inflict an eruptive plague upon a house in the land you possess, the owner of the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, something like a plague has appeared upon my house.
Okay, continue.
The priest shall order the house cleared before the priest enters to examine the plague so that nothing in the house may become impure. After that, the priest shall enter to examine the house and close up the house for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall return. If he sees that the plague has spread on the walls of the house, you gotta bring it up.
Okay,
The priest shall order the stones with the plague in them to be pulled out and cast outside the city into an impure place. The house shall be scraped inside all around, and the coating that is scraped off shall be dumped outside the city in an impure place. They shall take other stones and replace those stones with them, and take other coating and plaster the house.
so this sounds like a bad situation, right? But guess what? This is the best case scenario, because look what happens in the worst case scenario.
Okay, if the plague again breaks, the house shall be torn down, its stones and timber and all the coating on the house, and taken to an impure place outside the city.
Wow, you lose the house completely. So this is a summary of the laws of tzaraat ha-bayit. You can get off easy if you only have to replace the coating. That was the first case scenario, or pull aside the stones and isolate them, and still that the house survives, or worst case scenario. How do you understand this whole thing?
I
So,
don't,
any ideas? I want to offer you, like, just, is it punishment? Is it warning, reward, maybe natural? What? How do you understand these verses?
I understand it as a natural phenomenon, and it happens in our lives today. Hopefully not in any of our homes, but mold can be a big problem for a lot of people. And if you don't catch it early, and if you don't get rid of it right at the beginning, it can infect the whole house. And the way you get rid of it, apparently, there was a case in our neighborhood where a renter or a owner, I don't know, they didn't make their payments, they left in a huff, but they turned on all the water and left, and mold was rampant. So when a new owner bought that house at like a fire sale, a mold sale,
Yeah.
they had to take out the whole inside and
Wow.
they had to start all over. So that seems like a similar solution.
Uh-huh. So the priest's visit and the quarantine, and so that's to preserve the houses of the Israelites. It's like a manual, how to preserve your houses. That's so really nothing spiritual, right? You're saying it's really just if you follow these, you might save houses where mold has begun to affect, or
yeah, but it's more like, I mean, I think Joan gave a good, I just actually had a little bit of mold removed, and it was less than you described, but it's a process. It really is.
yeah,
But this reminds me of just group hysteria, because the fact is, if there is mold in one house, it's not going to jump into another house. It just, but people would look at it and be fearful and make these kinds of requirements because they're afraid.
yes.
Well, if people live in that house,
Well,
Natalie, they will get sick. And
Yes, they
so
will.
there is no getting around the mold problem. And you see in the desert, I don't think they'd have a mold problem. They might have other kinds of infections.
oh, but this
Yeah.
applies
But,
only.
and I
to
think
the-
you're absolutely right. They would get, the people who live in the house would get sick, but not their next door neighbor.
No, but there's no saving the natural stone because it's porous. I mean, there would be no
right.
saving it. They couldn't. That's it. They couldn't do anything.
They didn't have
about it.
bleach.
Yeah.
Right.
So the commentators go in a different direction because they want to see some spiritual meaning here.
Mike, could you clarify it? the the thing with the sacrifices, that only applied to the clothing, and it doesn't apply to the house, right?
Yes.
I think you're right. Yes, I think that's only clothing or the person himself.
The person. Okay, I
person.
just want. Okay, so on the surface, Torah's not saying anything spiritual here, right? And you're.
Oh no,
okay.
I'm sorry. No, no, I misspoke.
Oh,
I misspoke. I'll show you. I'll show
okay.
you.
I was wondering. I didn't
Trust,
see about
trust,
anything spiritual.
trust, but verify. Don't trust what I
Okay.
say. Don't trust what I say. Always verify. So this is the right. This is the section we're talking about. When you enter the land of Canaan, house. Now let's skip forward a few verses.
Right.
And
Oh, there it is.
there
Yeah.
it is. The plague has healed, and now to purge the
Two
house.
birds,
two
cedar
words,
wood,
cedar
crescent.
wood.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so there's your
the whole
spiritual.
ceremony, the whole shebang.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's spiritual that way, right?
We're thankful that it's done.
Okay. So Bill's suggesting that we have something spiritual here. Very interesting. And then what kind of spiritual punishment? The problem with that is, I'll tell you what, that affliction of a person, that person made something wrong. Affliction of the clothing. Okay, the person who wore that clothing. There's many people in the house. So who did something wrong, and why are the other house members being punished? Right? It's a
Didn't
problem.
it say in the part that I just read, if I inflict an eruptive plague on you, meaning it comes from God,
Ah, excellent,
a
excellent.
different thing.
The commentators look at that exactly at that point, and let's see some of them what they say. Rashi, this is amazing. I'll read this one. This is unless Neve, you want to read? Oh, he doesn't hear us. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is good news for them that legions of tzaraat will come upon them, because the Amorites had hidden away the treasures of gold inside the walls of their houses during the entire 40 years that the Israelites were in the desert. And through the legion, he will demolish the house, see verses 43-45, and find them.
Wow, pretty fanciful.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty out there in left field. Like that's
Well, there's a big assumption going on that the Israelites are coming into the land and they're going to occupy the houses formerly occupied by the Amorites.
yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah. And so Rashi does not want to see this as any form of spiritual punishment, but rather a blessing. It's almost like this is so bizarre that I'm gonna find something so counterintuitive and say, despite the fact that the tzaraat of the person, we know that's lashon hara, that's being associated. Miriam, the only person in the Bible that's actually being afflicted was Miriam, who spoke badly about her brother. But this one, no, this is going to be good news. This is really a very elaborate way for God to make you find those treasures. Right now, you would say this is so not pshat, because God has much simpler ways of just giving them the pleasures of the treasures. Right, in Egypt, God said, just ask the Egyptians and they'll give you their gold and silver, and that's what happened. Right, in the Exodus. So you would think God can somehow say to the Israelites, go to the Amorites and here's where you'll find it. Why do they need to go through this whole process of demolishing houses and occupying the time of the Kohanim and of the owners of the houses? It's a big expense. There must be simpler ways for the Israelites to discover these treasures.
Are there any Amorites left in Israel? I thought that everybody was that there was a war, a big war, and everybody that lived there before was gone, and then the Israelites came in.
Right. Oh, so I see what you're saying, Joel. There's no one to ask. Okay, they're all gone. So the only way to find those treasures is to go through this whole process.
Well, I have a comment. It's a little silly, but this is Hashem's way of having an insurance policy for the Israelites in case their house goes bad.
Yes.
Good one.
Okay, that will pay. That will pay for the remodeling. Okay. Let's see other opinions. A lot of commentators don't like this. The Chizkuni from the 13th century France, I think has a more plausible explanation. I'll read this one. This line has to be understood in conjunction with Deuteronomy 12:2. You must destroy utterly every place where the Gentiles have worshipped idols. How are we to know in which locations the Canaanites once worshipped idols? Answer: the plague that shows up on your house is an indication that this was a house which served such a purpose. It alerts us to the need to fulfill that commandment. It's a code. It's a coded message. Here's where there was idol worshiping. That's why these stones need to be destroyed. Maybe the whole house was used, so the whole house needs to be demolished. So it fits in with what Natalie said. I will inflict, I will tell you, right, where you need to destroy. This is part of destroying Avodah Zarah. This is part of cleaning up the land of Canaan from places where they worshipped idols. So none of it is mentioned in the verses, but the Chizkuni says we have to read it in conjunction with the commandment, which appears later in Devarim. And the Torah is focused in several places, not just in 12:2, about destroying every place, every hilltop, every house where there was idol worshiping. And
Shammai, I have a problem from what I read about the culture of West Semites. All these other people, they were idol worshipers, and they had miniature versions of their idols in the house. Everybody did it. So it's not conditional that house A didn't have it, house B had this need to have the plague. Anyway, it just counters what I understood about the religious practices of the West Semites, of the idol worship.
Bill, guess what? We did it too. That's why they had prophets screaming all the time, because we had idols in our houses.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I assume there were some Gentiles who were focused on other things, some businessmen who were just merchants and didn't really buy into this whole thing. So
okay, well, I mean,
you're probably right, but the Chizkuni didn't have that literature that you read.
Yeah,
So we just had the more up-to-date version.
So a very interesting take on the tzaraat. It's
good.
helping,
I like it. Yeah, like it.
It's helping the Israelites do sanitize basically the land from places where otherwise they would not know that these were used for idol worshiping. Okay.
I believe it's problems with humidity. That's what I believe.
Okay. And now finally we'll get to something more in line with the other forms of tzaraat. The Tosafists, the Dad Zkanim Balei Tosafot. Do we have a volunteer to read the Tosafists?
Okay. The Tosafist said, I will give, the Lord said to the Jewish people, see how different you are from the nations of the globe. When the former sin, I punish them, as we know from Genesis. The Lord afflicted Pharaoh with a plague and his house. However, when I have occasion to strike any one of you with a plague, I warn them by first sending a plague to the sinner's house and garments before striking his flesh. Why would I do this, seeing that the stones and the timber have not committed any sins against me? I do this in order to give you a warning that worse is to come if you do not heed my warning.
So Tosafists say blessing in disguise.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So a very creative interpretation. You think this is bad? If you don't change your ways, wait till there's worse forms of tzaraat. Yes, that fits in with the whole the attitude we see in other places where human life and health are much more important than possessions. And so if God and God is being benevolent here, or there's trying to first afflict the possessions are replaceable. A house, yeah, it costs a lot of money, but it's replaceable. A person with pain is not. Pain is pain. If I assume the tzaraat caused a lot of pain to the people. Being quarantined for weeks outside the community, not being able, that's terrible. So in order to avoid that, this is step one or stage one. And if it does its job, then you'll mend your ways and you won't get to the tzaraat ha-bayit, the tzaraat of the clothes, or tzaraat of the flesh.
However, if you look at it as God saying that everyone but the Jews is going to get a bad first punishment, that doesn't sound like Jewish philosophy. That
yeah.
God is going to punish all of his, he tells us, don't sing at the reed sea, these are my children. But here his children are going to get a punishment without any warning.
Yeah.
Another thing to consider is most houses in that time of history were single room houses, or if you were a successful person, you might have a 2-room house.
Right.
So, we think of what's involved in getting rid of the mold in a modern house. In a small 1-room house, to strip off all the plaster was probably not that big a deal.
Yes. So it is mitigating the punishment, so to speak. Yes, you'll get away with it if you if this is the first thing that comes, then it won't be such a loss. I see.
Shemaiah, I have a question.
Yes.
So in other places, in the Torah, God doesn't seem to be very bashful about telling the Jewish people they're screwing up, right? But now all of a sudden, instead of explicitly saying, he's sending this weird mold. So why would he do? Why would he all of a sudden shift to mold?
Okay, so you have a good question on the idea that this is punishment from God. Yeah, it's a good question. It's also, I would say, if this is really a warning in the sequence of the way the Torah presents the different types of tzaraat, here, we see it again. It should have been the first. But you see the red arrow. This is how it's sequential. This the yellow should have been the first, right? That's according to the Tosafist. That's the warning. And then should have come the clothing. And then finally the tzaraat of the flesh, but that's not the order that they appear. That's another question, another kasha.
Good point.
So I want to offer another suggestion. That's you actually raised it. Joan raised it, that they came into the land of Canaan. This is the only tzaraat that opens with the words, when you come into the land of Canaan. Where was it? Here. The other ones don't open with that. Presumably, the other tzaraats were also in the desert. The tzaraat of the flesh, the tzaraat of the clothing. This is the only one that has this introductory, when you enter the land of Canaan. So maybe what have happened is, this is a later addition, when they actually entered the land of Canaan, saw houses with mold, with discoloring, and then this later part was added. They tried to find some spiritual meaning, so they involved the priest, they quarantined, they said, let's make a whole set of laws about it. And this was a ex post facto addition to the Torah. What are the clues that support that? That, as we saw the sequence, it's not at the appropriate place. This introduction, when you enter the land of Canaan, right? And even traditional commentators agree that some sections of the Torah were written later, like the death of Moses. Moses cannot write about his own death. So many commentators say that was added later by Joshua, by others. So it's not such a big a rift, so to speak, or to say that. And I'll show you that the Talmud even has such a problem with it, that the Talmud says, the Talmud will not say this was added later by a different scribe, but the Talmud does say it doesn't fit the Torah. And we have an opinion in the Sanhedrin, in the Bavli Talmud, that this tzaraat never happened and never will. Let's read that section of the Talmud. Volunteer to read the tractate.
There has never been a house afflicted with leprosy of the house, and there will never be one in the future. And why then was the passage relating to leprosy of the house written in the Torah? So that you may expound upon new understandings of the Torah and receive reward for your learning.
So it's a puzzle.
I guess I am going to be an epicurus now. Don't tell my parents, but this reminds me of a post facto justification for a conquering people coming into a land and doing a scorched earth policy, because that's what armies and conquerors do. And now we have a justification. There was mold, there was leprosy, you know.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. So after they did it, they were trying to explain the way they
But
were
that's,
feeling,
yeah, that's
maybe,
the epicurus,
yeah.
you know.
No, it's
I think it was when you go into a new country, every country has a different climate, even though it can be close to another country, it's still a little bit different, and maybe they didn't know how to react to a moldy house.
Yes.
So this is telling them how to do it. If you stay in a moldy house, I mean, we all know if you stay in a moldy house, you and your family and everybody who is exposed to that will get sick. And so it is telling the people how not to be sick.
Okay.
Could be.
I will take Nada's explanation and say this is what we're supposed to expound upon. This is the new, in other words, we're supposed to do midrash. This is so bizarre. This opinion the Talmud says never happened, never will, totally theoretical. The reason we're discussing even now in our class now, how not to behave, how not to, okay, sometimes we have to go to war, we have to defend ourselves. But if we conquer a new place, right? So maybe back then it was okay. Maybe back then, like you say, scorched earth, they're trying to justify ex post facto, but now we're learning it, and every generation the Torah has to adapt, and we have to learn new meanings. And so maybe now we have to talk about how not to behave as conquerors. So I like your explanation, Natalie, very much. And I'm tying it, I think it can be tied to this passage in the Talmud, that this provides us an opportunity to talk about something so strange and learn from it something, right? Because that was my next question. What can we learn from this? The Talmud seems to say, don't be bothered about the facts, about the nuances, because it never happened and never will. That's very interesting. Of course, there's no testimony in any of our sources that this ever happened, but they also are barring it from any future happenings, right? So they're turning as passages in the Torah to a totally theoretical exercise, a theoretical, right? You may call it thinking exercise.
Shema, isn't this a very slippery slope to say that something in the Torah never happened?
So it's said about several other things, very discrete things. So it's a great question. This Talmud discusses the rebellious son who's supposed to be executed just for being gluttonous and drinking wine and eating too much meat. The sages, again, were so upset and outraged by this kind of commandment that they turned it into theoretical. It's also said about the demolishing an entire city for avodah zarah. In other words, it's sort of a massacre of an entire city, men, women, and children. When you discover that an entire city worshipped avodah zarah, that passage too, they take and make it theoretical. So I could maybe, so if we're looking to what is a common thread, what are the 3-4 things that they said never happened? It's things that were a moral outrage to them. And maybe, so that's why I think I tie against what Natalie said. Maybe they felt this is a moral outrage to come in there and destroy houses and just demolish places. And so this is theoretical. Next week, we're going to do a midrash on a rock, on rocks, and see a rock that changed the course of history, of the state of Israel. How did a rock feature in the Declaration of Independence? And so I want to whet your appetite, WHET, that kind of whet, and I hope you come back next week, because next week is actually Israel's Yom HaAtzmaut, independence. So it'll be fitting to discuss how a rock almost saved the day, actually saved the day, because there was big turmoil, big machlokes, and the solution was Iraq. So we'll talk about that next week.
I think I remember from last year, but I'll wait till next week.
Okay.
Right, yeah, right.
All right. Thank you all for joining us.
Great
Thank
lesson.
you.
Thank you,
Thank
Sean.
you.
Good.